I'm Bridget Owens, and you're listening to the Waxing Soul podcast. Join me on an exploration of mindful modern magic, a journey towards deeper understanding of self and transformative individual spirituality. It's November 12th, 2020, and on today's episode, we'll be discussing how our spiritual history impacts our search for a path of our own, why trying on many different traditions isn't the best way to figure out which one fits best, and what questions to ask yourself to figure out what you're really searching for. Are you ready to grow your soul? Episode 3, we're really getting somewhere now. We're getting serious. So I thought at this point in the proceedings, I would talk a little bit about how I got here, to this point where I'm recording weekly podcasts about spirituality. And it all started with me realizing that the spiritual tradition that I grew up with maybe wasn't such a good fit for me. I moved out on my own after college, and so my father was, is an evangelical preacher. I grew up in small independent churches, and I got to do cool stuff like, teach myself to play the organ because nobody else was doing it, and, help decorate the church for holidays and do, cool fun stuff because it was a small church and I was the preacher's kid. And, plus it was time when I got to see family members that I didn't get to see otherwise very often. So, we went out to eat every Sunday after church, which was something we didn't do much as a family. So basically it was like all of that stuff, which really tied me to the church experience growing up. And when I moved away and all of that stuff wasn't true anymore, the church part itself, I just didn't want to go. It wasn't me. So to speed this story up a bit, that was the beginning of me searching for a spiritual path that was a good fit for me, that didn't require me to change fundamental things about myself to fit with some other tradition, which is an important topic for another day. So, but over the course of a couple of decades, I've been on this spiritual journey, the same as lots and lots of you, where, somewhere along the line, I started really thinking about that whole process of seeking out your, authentic spiritual tradition. Because I see so many people struggle with it. I struggled with it. It took me a really long time to find my own authentic path. Lots of my writing and projects kind of center around this question of what that methodology looks like. Is there some, set of guidelines or steps that we can use to kind of guide this journey or this search? Because here's the deal. The spiritual tradition you're born into isn't necessarily the one best suited for you. That's just luck, good or bad. But everyone's spiritual journey starts out with whatever tradition they were raised in as kids, even if that's a complete lack of tradition. A lot of people, then a lot of people stay right there in that tradition that they were raised in all the way through their lives. But so many of us don't. And there's a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which is the fact that, being born into a family or a culture which has a religious tradition already doesn't mean that it's a tradition which fits you. I like calling it our religion of origin or tradition of origin because it's not really something we choose at all. Most of us, I'm sure, have known, couples who came from very different spiritual backgrounds, maybe not even that different. Like, my wife's parents, one is Protestant, one is Catholic, neither one is super devout or whatever, but there was, some discussion before she was born about which church to send, my wife and her brother to as kids. There was a decision made about that by her parents. And, my wife was raised Catholic. So, by that, I mean, she was sent to CCD classes and had to go to mass right up until she was confirmed. And then I'm not sure she ever went again until she and I got together when I was in my Catholic phase. But, the thing is, we've all known those couples who had to talk about which tradition they'd raised their kids in. And it has everything to do with how important religion and spirituality is to the parents, and literally zero to do with anything else. There's no way to know what any of us are going to grow up to need most from a spiritual path. So we start out either indoctrinated into a very serious religious tradition like I was, or made to go through the motions like my wife was, or with hardly any tradition, if any at all. And that forms the start point for our journey later in life. It's all decided for us, that beginning step, largely by chance. It's just, what family we're born into. And I think it's, it makes sense to think about this as a journey, but where you start out on the journey doesn't decide anything about the end if you don't let it. It's an important factor in how the journey unfolds, but it doesn't determine anything about the end. Some of us might not actually end up that far from where we started out, and that's okay. Even if we're leaving behind a tradition that, that doesn't fit, it doesn't mean that we have to be looking for something opposite or something drastically different. And the thing is that if you're on a search for something that feels relevant, that feels significant, that, that feels like it's fulfilling to you, you have to think more about who you are and what you need than you think about what's good and bad about whatever traditions and faiths are kind of on your radar, right? What's really important is getting to the core of what it is you need out of a spiritual path so that you can go and find it. Okay, so why does it even matter how we go about our search? We all start off in one tradition and we either stay in it or we go off in some other direction. And if you've been at this search for a while, and I know, I bounced around between different traditions for quite a while, you know that during all of that bouncing, you're mostly learning about yourself, about what does and doesn't work for you, than you are, learning about broader spiritual concepts. And, it's a way, sure, to get where you want to go, but you may never actually find a path that brings you anything of real spiritual value that way. Randomly trying out different religions and groups and traditions isn't the best way forward. So yeah, wherever we started out way back when was, decided without us. Like I said, I was raised evangelical Protestant. But from there I decided to become Catholic because, all the really intensely personal spiritual experiences I'd ever had were in cathedrals and churches and monasteries and such, in Europe. And I wanted more of that. And then I met my wife, who was dabbling in Wicca at the time, and someone I knew told me about a pagan meetup that, I thought she might be interested in. And I started going with her to help her meet people. And pretty soon I was interested too. So, and I kind of meandered my way through a sampling of, neo-pagan things, transhumanism, different flavors of atheism, all that stuff. Kind of a random path. And where that left me a few years ago was, wondering why, if I didn't believe in a deity, because I believe in a lot of things, but none of them are all-powerful or outside the laws of nature. We just don't understand the laws of nature in their entirety. But, given that, why did I still really want some kind of spiritual life? Is it really hard coded into us as humans? Like some people think, was there really any evidence for it in human history? And, and while we're at it, where did spirituality and religion start? So I had a ton of questions just from my own feelings and what I felt like I needed for whatever reason. I started thinking very deliberately about how a person can go about finding a spirituality that means something to them without doing what we usually do, which is find ourselves, not agreeing with something or drifting away from one path and getting, dissatisfied with whatever church or tradition or whatever we're involved in, and then starting to look around for, for something else that looks better. Maybe we look around at our friends and find, some that seem really into their spiritual lives, and we'll try that path out. Or maybe we'll, focus on whatever made us want to leave wherever we were and look at, whatever path seems to be the opposite. Maybe we'll start, reading up and studying a whole range of things to try and, make an informed decision about what might work for us. Every single person I've known who left one religion either scrambled towards or fell into another one, or either that or kind of renounced it all and went anti-religion for at least a little while, if not permanently. And some of them bounced from path to path like I don't know, like trying on clothes. And it just, Some just settle into something else and maybe they're happier, but they just don't really think very deeply about it. Really, most people I know who have ever left a religion or a spiritual tradition end up kind of picking something to point to as the closest thing to what they believe, but they pretty much stop actively participating in religion or spirituality at some point, kind of just because they can't find something that fits, so they just sort of drift away, which is fine, totally great, totally cool. Religion isn't for everybody. But depending on how you define spirit, there's a good chance that even if you don't frame it in what you would call spiritual terms, even if you leave behind spirituality as, or religion at least, there's a good chance that, you will keep searching for something to fill what's really a spiritual void in your life. And you still do it probably in a random tossing darts kind of way. And whether you think of it in those terms or not, we all have stuff that we do to enrich our spirits, even if we do it outside of kind of how we might think of spirituality, how we might define that. But back to my main point, which is that kind of wandering around trying on different paths could eventually lead you somewhere good, but it's a pretty hit and miss way to go about it. And really, if that's the prevailing methodology, that assumes that the religious and spiritual options kind of already prepackaged for us are going to fit everyone one way or another. And I want to kind of challenge that way of thinking. What if the best spiritual path for each of us is the one we put together for ourselves? Crazy way to think, right? What if instead of searching for a place we fit, we deliberately and purposefully, work to build up a spiritual life around us wherever we already are. So spirituality and religion, honestly, have changed every time human society changes. Every time there's been a change in human history, every time cultures shift and societies rise and fall, religion and spirituality change with it. And right now, more than ever, we live in a world where we get to guide our own evolution. We are aware of how we develop and can engineer that for ourselves. So for most of us, it makes much more sense to craft and evolve our own tradition, our own path, than to try to fit into one that already exists. If you're looking for a spiritual path, where do you even begin? There's something really important underneath that question. If you're looking at, and choosing from between many different potential paths and traditions, there's an implicit understanding that more than one, if not all, of those potential paths are legitimate to some extent. If you're looking for what fits you, but recognizing that there's a choice there, you recognize that all the ones you don't choose are also legitimate belief systems for other people. By even just recognizing that there are options, what that means, what that implies, especially once you consider that human spirituality and religion is constantly evolving as humanity evolves and changes, what that means is that there is no one right answer, and that there are lots and lots and lots of ways to approach and think about a spiritual life. So given all those choices, the first step in finding or building something that works for you is asking yourself the right questions about what it is you're looking for. And like I talked about in the episode on intentions, lots of times we're not really good about knowing what we want or what we're looking for without doing some deep self-work. So I'm kind of prone to comparing the spiritual search to like the search for a career. It's about finding a place where you fit in a wide range of possibilities. It's not just about whether it's a place where you can fit or where, somebody thinks that you ought to fit or wants you to fit. It's about your fulfillment and advancement towards, whatever goals you have for yourself in life, right? So my undergraduate degree is actually in architecture. And when I got close to graduating, I did what all of my peers were doing, and I went through the books of, okay, so let me explain that I'm in my 40s. I'm a Gen Xer. And when I graduated from college, we totally had the internet, but it wasn't really useful for everything just yet. So we had to go through these volumes of listings of architecture firms from all over the country instead of, like just Googling it. So I knew where I wanted to live. I knew what kind of projects I wanted to work on. And I went through this like encyclopedia of architects and made this list of the ones who were everything I wanted, like right place, right projects, right size of firm, all of that. And then I made a list of like second choices, which were, like maybe in the right place, but was a bigger firm than I wanted to work for or whatever. And then I had third level choices. Long story short, I ended up getting hired by one of my third choice firms. And they worked on hospital and prison projects. It was very interesting. I learned a lot. It was really good for about 3 years. And then it wasn't. And, I lost that job unexpectedly. And I had a moment where my first instinct was to do exactly, what I was talking about before with spiritual paths and start like sending out resumes to other firms that were maybe different enough to be better fits or whatever. And after about 15 minutes of me sort of mentally scrambling through that process of like, I got to update my portfolio and I got to send out resumes. And I finally stepped back, and I asked myself probably the most useful question I had ever asked myself up to that point. Am I doing what I want to be doing with my life? And I realized that I 100% dreaded looking for another architecture job. Like, the problem wasn't finding another version of the same job with better characteristics. I needed to build up a new vision of what my career was going to look like. So I started asking myself the really deeply important questions about what I wanted from life, what made me feel fulfilled when I did it, all of that stuff. And that was actually the start of a spiritual journey all its own. But my point is that, it's a really good analog of what a spiritual journey should look like. Sure, we can start with asking, what wasn't good for us in our old path and what was good, what things, in the past made us feel connected and inspired, all of that. Those are good questions. But we definitely shouldn't, stop there. We should be asking questions like, what has my spiritual life or religious life given me that I can't get other places? And bottom line here, most of us have a preconceived notion of what spirituality is, what it gives us, what we need it for. And, more importantly than that, most of us have never really deeply questioned those things for a lot of reasons. We grow up thinking of spirituality or religion in certain terms, and we just take that as truth. And that's where we really need to start on a journey, to something more meaningful, because those assumptions, those concepts are really what drives us forward on the journey. If you don't know what you're looking for, or even why you're looking for it, how are you supposed to find it, right? So what I've got for you to download, if you want to delve deeper into this and want, a little bit of guidance, is just a list of questions to ask yourself as you think about your spiritual journey, wherever you are on that journey. Use them as journal prompts, use them for meditation, maybe write them in your planner or, on a Post-it at your desk at work or something. And just, remind yourself to think about those questions during the day, or on a regular basis as you're doing your spiritual work. And you can download that list at bridgetowens.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Look for a new episode of Waxing Soul every Thursday. You can find us on bridgetowens.com/podcast and wherever you usually listen to podcasts. If you can't find us at your usual podcast spot, drop a message to bridget@bridgetowens.com. All materials and resources, except the music, are copyright Bridget Owens. Music is Dreamcatcher by Kevin MacLeod, used under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International. Find out more at bridgetowens.com/podcast. Many, many thanks to my readers, listeners, friends, mentors, inspirations, and my family. None of this, of course, happens in a bubble. Until next week, blessed be and be good to yourself.